All right, be seated. All right, Mr. Rosenwasser, are we ready?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, so let's bring the jury back in.
Yes, Your Honor.
Your Honor, the jury is present and seated.
Very good. Mr. Rosenwasser, you may proceed with your closing argument.
Thank you, Your Honor. Members of the jury, what we had over the past couple of days is obvious. It's a jury trial. The reason that we had a jury trial is because the defendant's exercising his constitutional rights. And because of that, we have the burden, and we gladly accepted of proving this case to you beyond a reasonable doubt. So what we have to do as the state of Florida is prove beyond a reasonable doubt that that defendant committed the crime of manslaughter. Now, what is a reasonable doubt? Well, Judge Ballone just read the instruction to you. He indicated that you're going to get the entire jury packet so you could read it back when you deliberate. You don't have to commit to memory anything. I am going to go through some of the jury instructions with you, though. Now, when you hear reasonable doubt, you heard the term reasonable. And that's going to be important in two different areas of this jury instruction. Now, the definition of a reasonable doubt is kind of strange, but what it tells you is what a reasonable doubt is not. Okay, so let's focus on that. What a reasonable doubt is not. It's not a forced doubt. It's not an imaginary doubt. It's not a possible doubt. It's not a speculative doubt. Those are not reasonable doubts. So if you find yourself saying, is this possible, or what could be, those are possibilities. They're not reasonable based on the evidence. You can't speculate. Now, here is a story that I tell in closing arguments. Admittedly, it might sound silly, but it's to demonstrate what is and what is not a reasonable doubt. So let's say that you're walking your dog at night, and it's Florida, of course, and you hear some thunder, you see some lightning, you smell the rain, you go to bed. You wake up, water everywhere. Okay? Beyond a reasonable doubt, it's been proven that it rained. Now, is it possible that a helicopter went over the neighborhood, go into some forest fire, dump the bucket of water over the neighborhood? Is it possible the sun's not going to rise? Okay? But that's not reasonable based on the evidence. The evidence is there was thunder, there was lightning, the smell of rain. When you look at all that, it's been proven beyond a reasonable doubt that it rained. And one of the most important things that you do not leave when you come into a courtroom is your common sense. So common sense tells you that it rained. Now, can you speculate this? So let's say that you have some kids in the neighborhood. Let's say there's 3 kids. You got Allison, you got Alyssa, and you got Timmy. Okay? And Timmy's the terrible one in the neighborhood, and he has the super soaker gun, and he likes to spray that super soaker gun everywhere. Now, can you speculate that he took that super soaker gun, went all around the neighborhood when you were sleeping, and sprayed water everywhere? Well, sure, because you can speculate about anything. But is that reasonable based on the evidence? Thunder, lightning, smell of rain? Absolutely not. That's not reasonable. So when you look at the evidence, now the evidence in this case came from that witness stand, and it's from all the exhibits up there. When you look at all of that, we've proven beyond a reasonable doubt that that defendant is guilty of manslaughter. Now, another part of that jury instruction about reasonable doubt is this. It says, a reasonable doubt could come from the conflict in the evidence. Now, in any trial, I submit to you this. Whether it's a criminal case, a civil case, there are conflicts. Okay? Sometimes these conflicts arise because witnesses see different things. Okay? That's human nature. That doesn't necessarily mean that the case hasn't been proven beyond a reasonable doubt, especially if all the elements, which we're going to talk about, of the crime have been proven. Now, also a conflict can come, like in this case, there was expert differences in opinion. Okay? But just because there's a conflict doesn't mean there's a reasonable doubt, because you could never prove someone guilty if you just said there's a conflict, because there's always a conflict inherent in a trial. So what you have to do is what we talked about during jury selection. As jurors, you have to look at all the evidence, determine what evidence is credible. You find that credible evidence, you apply it to the law. That's how you come up with a true and just verdict. Okay? And what you do to evaluate witness testimony is you determine what's credible. And how do you do that? Well, first you use your common sense. So what you could do is you could watch a witness and you look at them and you know what? That person is telling the truth. But if you're not sure about somebody, what you look at is to see if that testimony is corroborated, consistent with other testimony. And if it is, that's how you know that particular piece of evidence is truthful and credible. And one of the things you look at, you just heard, is whether witnesses were honest and straightforward in answering questions. We're going to talk about that in just a little bit. So you weigh the evidence, you find out what's credible, you apply it to the law, and that's how you come up with a just verdict. Now, anything that I say during my closing argument, anything the defense attorneys say if they choose to give a closing argument, anything Mr. Schaub says, that's not evidence at all. So if you remember the testimony and the evidence differently, rely on that. Do not rely on what any of us say, because what we say is not evidence. It's simply argument. Okay? So again, don't rely on our arguments, rely only on the evidence. Now, what is the law of this case? Well, the defendant's been charged with manslaughter. So you just heard the instruction. Let's take a look at it just one more time. And the manslaughter instruction is very simple. To prove the crime of manslaughter, the state must prove the following two elements beyond a reasonable doubt. Number one, Marquise McLaughlin is dead. No issue with that. Unfortunately, number two, Michael Drejka intentionally committed an act that caused the death of Marquise McLaughlin. Okay? So, did he intentionally shoot him? Yes. The way this case has been framed for you is whether or not this defendant was justified in shooting Marquise McLaughlin. But I'm going to frame it a little differently, because based on the evidence, and really here's the million-dollar question. We've heard so much evidence, okay? But here's the million-dollar question you need to ask yourself. Was this defendant justified in shooting a man that came out to protect his family while he's retreating, while he was unarmed? That's the million-dollar question. Is he liable? Is he guilty of killing someone who was protecting his family and was retreating after that firearm came out? Is he guilty of shooting a retreating, unarmed man? And the answer is absolutely yes. Every person has a duty to act reasonably towards others. If there's a violation of that duty without any conscious intention to do harm, that violation is negligence. Okay? This case has nothing to do with negligence. Okay? He intentionally committed an act. He intentionally shot him. The only issue, and I submit to you it's not even really an issue, is whether he was justified in killing Marquise McLaughlin as he was retreating. In order to convict a manslaughter, it's not necessary for the state to prove he had the intent to cause death. What that's telling you is, let's say that he shot him in the leg, but it hit the femoral artery, and he bled out. Okay? Doesn't matter, because he had the intent to shoot him, not the intent to cause death. But in this particular case, we know he intended to kill him, because no matter what we say, it was the most perfect shot he could take. Hit him right here, traveled through his lung, through his heart, rested on the other side. The most perfect shot he could take. Didn't hit him in the toe, foot, knee, calf, thigh, stomach. The most perfect shot. You're going to, well, you already did hear the introduction to homicide instruction. So let's briefly talk about that. And again, the only issue in this case that's been framed for you is whether he's justified. That's it. That's the entire issue. So here's justifiable homicide. The killing of a human being is justifiable homicide and lawful if necessarily done while resisting an attempt to murder. Okay? There is no evidence at all to show Marquise McLaughlin was attempting to murder him or commit a felony. There's no evidence that he was attempting to commit a felony on him. He was retreating. Excusable homicide. The killing of a human being is excusable and therefore lawful if it falls under one of these three. Okay? When the killing is committed by accident and misfortune. If you look at 1, 2, and 3, this is not an accident. This is not misfortune. The defendant intentionally shot him and killed him. Okay? So, we're going to talk more about this because this falls into the self-defense instruction. It's certainly not an excusable homicide because it's not as if he was cleaning his gun on a table. The table leg, by an act of God, broke. The gun fell on the ground and it accidentally discharged. That's not number 1. It's not number 3 because number 3 talks about a dangerous weapon not being used. Well, a firearm's a dangerous weapon. And it's not number 2 again because there's no accident or misfortune. He intentionally shot him and killed him. So that's why this entire instruction does not apply to this case. So now we go to justifiable use of deadly force. There's a lot to this instruction. Okay? It's a defense to the crime of manslaughter if the actions of Michael Drejka constituted the justifiable use of deadly force. Okay? Michael Drejka was justified in using deadly force if he reasonably believed. So there's the term reasonable again. Did he reasonably believe, as Marquise McLaughlin was backing up and turning to go into the store, that he was about to die? Because that's what that instruction says. Did the defendant reasonably believe he was going to die as Michael McLaughlin backs away when that firearm comes out? Did the defendant reasonably believe he was about to suffer great bodily harm? Was he about to be beaten to a pulp as Michael McLaughlin went backwards? Was he about to die? Was this defendant about to die or be beaten to a pulp when he took the first step back? Absolutely not. What about the second step back? Absolutely not. He's getting farther back. What about the third step back? Absolutely not. What about when he turns to go to the store? Absolutely not. And when you look at those still photographs, you'll see that Michael McLaughlin's foot is facing where he wants to go. And the only reason his eyes are on that defendant is because he's looking at the firearm that's about to kill him. And it's not uncommon. In fact, it's very common for people to look at the firearm. He's looking right at him as he's pointing that gun. His entire body is saying, I give up, I'm leaving. And he's shot right here. And the bullet path of travel tells you he was leaving. But that video really tells you everything. You know, we have so much evidence, and it's really, to some extent, overkill. Because the video tells you the whole story. It really does. There's nothing wrong with that video. It tells you perfectly what happened. There's no issue here, really. I submit to you it's really a cut and dry case. Okay? There's no misinterpreting that Michael McLaughlin's going backwards. There's no way to see it any other way. Okay? So, did Michael Drejka reasonably believe that he was about to die? No. Did he reasonably believe that he was about to be beaten to a pulp? Okay? And when you watch that video, watch it carefully. Okay? And I'm sure, the defense might say the same thing. Okay? And pay attention to this, which I'm sure you already have. When the defendant's on the ground, you could see both Robert Castelli and Michael McLaughlin start to move before the gun comes out. They both simultaneously recognize that he's pulling a firearm. And before that gun is even out, Michael McLaughlin is retreating. Watch the video, you'll see it. And when the gun's out, he's in full retreat, and he can't go back any farther because that car's there, and that's when he takes his turn to go to the store. That's exactly what you see on the video. Michael McLaughlin is reacting perfectly to what happened. Now, can you argue that the defendant could have pulled out that firearm? Absolutely. We could even say that he was justified in pulling the gun. But that was it. There was no reason for him to shoot and kill Michael McLaughlin. It was over when that gun came out. So arguably, was he right in pulling the gun out? Sure, but could he have killed him? No, because he wasn't about to die. He's holding a firearm. He's holding the weapon that ends the whole thing. How could he reasonably believe he was about to die? He didn't. That's why it's not justifiable use of deadly force. Now here's the other part of that instruction. In deciding whether he was justified, you must consider the circumstances by which he was surrounded at the time. But here's really the most important part of that instruction. The appearance of danger must have been so real, here's the term again, reasonably, that a reasonably cautious and prudent person under the same circumstances would have believed the danger could be avoided only through killing him. That's what it says. That's the instruction. And this is an important thing. It's not what the defendant thought. It's not, well, I thought this was going on, therefore I killed him. Okay? And this is important. It's what would a reasonably cautious and prudent person in his situation. It's not him, okay? That's very important. It's not what he thought. It's what a reasonable person in his situation would have thought. That's an objective standard. A reasonable person in his position. So would a reasonable person think that while I have a firearm out and Michael McLaughlin's going backwards, that they were in danger of dying themselves? No. That's probably the most important part of this jury instruction. It's not what he thought, it's what a reasonable person thought in those circumstances. And when you watch that video, it is clear as day that even before that firearm came out, Michael McLaughlin was retreating. You can clearly see this is not justifiable use of deadly force. You cannot kill a retreating, unarmed man. That's not reasonable. No reasonable person would ever think that. That's why this doesn't apply. And that's why he's guilty of manslaughter. Let's talk about the facts of the case. Now, I'm also going to show you some clips. Okay? Now, you have all this evidence back there. I'm going to show you maybe 14 minutes of clips from the defendant's interview. First, let's go through the facts. So we know that Brittany Jacobs goes to the Circle A store. We know that when Brittany Jacobs goes to the store, she goes into the handicapped parking spot. When she gets to the handicapped parking spot, she's there. Should she park there? No. Side note, doesn't really mean anything. It's not a legally marked handicapped spot. Again, that's just a side note. The defendant still thought that he could go and enforce it, but side note. So she gets to the parking spot, and what happens next? Well, the defendant Marquise McLaughlin, and if at any time I said Michael, I apologize because I meant Marquise. Marquise McLaughlin gets out of the vehicle. And you can see he's walking up to the store with his 5-year-old son. And there's nothing unusual about that. Now let's just very briefly touch on Buffington's testimony. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. If you thought that that went on for a long time, it probably did feel like it did. It was important. Because one of the instructions Judge Malone reads you is, was a witness honest and straightforward in answering the questions? There is no way to think that Dr. Buffington was honest and straightforward in answering any question. So when you look at his testimony and you compare it to Dr. Goldberger's, I submit to you, Dr. Goldberger, that's the reasonable explanation, okay? Because we had a talk about ecstasy, MDMA, all the literature, even the literature that Buffington talked about, tells you it's an empathetic drug, it's happiness, gives you an enhanced mood, it's not an aggressive drug, that's why people use it in club scenes. Okay, you heard all of that, I'm not going to go back over that with you. But probably one of the most important things that Dr. Goldberger says, we have to look at all this in context, and we can because we have a video that tells you everything that Marquise did that day was reasonable, not consistent with some adverse reaction to MDMA. I mean, when Buffington tells you that he should have brought his 5-year-old with him to the altercation, I submit to you that's unbelievable that that's what an expert's opinion would be. To drag the 5-year-old out into this scene that was out there. Or that once he's shot and he's basically dying in the parking lot, he should somehow go back towards the shit. Unbelievable, his opinion. I submit it has no credibility. So we know that Marquise is walking up to the Circle A with his 5-year-old, and as he gets there, he goes into the store. Now what he doesn't know is that this defendant pulls up in his truck, and for the next minute and 43 seconds, we know that there's a really loud confrontation that's happening outside. Because everybody that's out in the parking lot looks over. Now, when you watch the defendant's interview, he makes it sound like he walked up, hey, how you doing? Would you mind moving your car? Well, that's not anyone's testimony, but you don't even have to rely on anyone's testimony, because when you watch the video, you can see people, look, whoa, what's going on over there? So when he portrays it as, an act of kindness, not even remotely close.
Those are facts, not in evidence.
When he portrays it as an act of kindness, it's not even remotely close. He went there with the intent to confront Brittany Jacobs. So Robert Castelli, you hear from him, he goes into the store and tells the cashier there's an altercation outside. Okay? Whatever the language is that was used doesn't truly matter because Marquise reacts properly. Now, I submit to you, this is very reasonable. I submit that many people, hearing that the family member of theirs is outside, wife, girlfriend, knowing 2 kids in the car, they would probably drop everything and run out of that store as fast as they can. Marquise was reasonable. He put his stuff down on the counter, started walking out. Let's go see what's going on. Turns the corner. You can see it's all on video. He's just walking down the sidewalk. He doesn't really do anything until he sees Brittany get out of the car. And when Brittany gets out of the car, now Brittany and this defendant are basically face to face, knowing there's an altercation. What does he do? Does he do this? Does he throw a wild haymaker, punch him in the temple, and knock him unconscious? No. Does he roundhouse kick him in the face and knock him unconscious, jump on him, begin beating him to a pulp? No. He shoves him. His girlfriend of 10 years. That's all he did. Was it a hard shove? We could play, as attorneys, we play synonym games all day long. Shove, violent shove, push, whatever it is, it's on video. You could describe it any way you want. We're not here to tell you that he lightly tapped them. He shoved them to create distance. I submit to you, that's certainly not unreasonable. Okay? Let's take the alternate position that it was unreasonable. Let's say that he shouldn't have pushed him. You still, no matter what, can't shoot a retreating, unarmed man. Does not matter if you believe in the shove, you don't believe in the shove. It does not matter. You can't shoot an unarmed, retreating man regardless. I submit he was fine in shoving him. He was protecting his family. But even if you feel he wasn't, you think, you know what, he shouldn't have done that, fine. He still couldn't kill him. And that's important. So he comes down, he shoves him to the ground. Watch the video because, again, before that firearm even comes out, everyone is moving. Now, if he was really under the influence and having an adverse effect at MDMA, he wouldn't have reacted just like Castelli because Castelli wasn't taking MDMA. You can see it for yourself. That's what happened in this case. That's it. Marquise is protecting his family. Again, it doesn't matter if you feel it was a good shove or a bad shove. That's not an issue in the case. It's not. It doesn't matter that Brittany parked in that spot. She shouldn't have, but that's not an issue in the case. Really, what this is about is his behaviors. That's it. You know how this really started? It's not Brittany parking in that spot. It's because he's got a pet peeve, and he wants to be the armed enforcer at the Circle A. It's his problem. That's why we're here. Not because she parked there. It's because he takes it upon himself to be the enforcer at the Circle A. You heard from everybody. You don't put yourself in a position like he did when you're armed. And think about his interview, and we're going to go through it in just a little bit. Why does he say he felt it was okay to go to that Circle A like that? I always take precautions. I carry a permit. I could enforce this parking lot situation if I want to because I have a permit. So when you put that sentence together, what's your common sense tell you? I carry the final solution on me. Hey, whatever happens, happens. I know I got the final solution. I feel comfortable going up to anybody because I'm carrying the final solution. There's no other way to look at that. No other way to look at that statement. When you watch this, when you watch the clips, but when you watch the whole thing, I'm sure you already did this, but watch everything he says, how he says it, what his body language is telling you when he says it. Think about the terminology he used, okay? We're talking about law enforcement, and then we talk about civilians. Well, remember, the law is the same. Justifiable use of deadly force is the same, okay? But think of the terms he's using. I submit to you he's a parking lot vigilante. He uses this terminology in his interview. Neutralize. How many civilians walk around saying the word neutralize? Negative. How many civilians walk around saying negative? Did you make dinner tonight? Negative. Want to go to the movies tonight? Negative. Those are law enforcement and military and militant and vigilante terms. No one talks like that. Neutralize, negative. Nobody does that. But that's the terminology he uses. And watch how he says these things. Like, I can't believe that Brittany Jacobs confronted me. That's his mentality. He goes to enforce a spot at a convenience store, not even like it's his own property, and then he's like, oh, I can't believe she talked back to me like that. How could a woman who's alone in the car with her 2 kids talk to me when I'm confronting her about a parking spot? That's his mentality. So watch his demeanor in that interview. It tells you everything about where he's coming from. This isn't remotely close to a justified shooting. Negative, neutralize, and force multiplier. How many civilians walk around talking about the force multiplier? Nobody does that. During the defense opening, they were talking about some things. I briefly want to touch on them. One of the things that was mentioned was that this defendant was whiplashed and he was violently shoved, thrown to the ground. Pandemonium ensued. He didn't know what was happening when he shot. Was that the evidence at all in this case? Yeah, he shoved to the ground. When he's coming up, is he all wobbly? No. In fact, the witnesses told you he was very smooth in pulling out the firearm. You see it on the video. Aims, he's not even really aiming. It's like one, I mean, it's actually almost fairly amazing how he comes up from that shove, draws down on Marquise, who then starts backing up, and then he executes him. That's what happens. So, was he traumatized and whiplashed and it was pandemonium? No. In fact, the defendant himself tells you during the interview, I was slightly dazed. Oh, I hit my head, I had a concussion. No, I was slightly dazed. Tells you himself. Doesn't have to come from anybody else. He tells you himself. But then you got Robert Costelli who tells you, hey, when that guy got up, he was fine. He walked around. He was, he had the wherewithal to tell people, go away, go away. I just shot somebody. Get out of here. He has the wherewithal to unload his gun, secure it, put it in his car in the center console. That's not a guy who's suffering some type of traumatic effect from being pushed to the ground. He was fine. He was shoved to the ground. Again, it doesn't matter if you believe that was a good shove or bad shove. You can't shoot a retreating unarmed man. That's it. There was nothing wrong with him. Now, what was he saying to himself? Okay, this is important. What was he saying to himself? What did he think was going to happen? He pushed me. That says it all. Then as justification, and again, you're going to watch the entire interview yourself. Okay? He doesn't throw the 21-foot rule out there just to say it. He says it because it's relevant to him. Because he doesn't know what the rule is, doesn't mean Marquise pays for it with his life. Think about that. He doesn't know what the 21-foot rule is, and Marquise is dead. That's not justifiable use of deadly force. You can't do that. You can't be mistaken and kill somebody. And in his interview, you know what he says? I assumed something. The definition of assumption is without proof. Would a reasonably cautious and prudent person kill somebody without proof? Do you kill somebody? Does a reasonable person kill another human being because they assume something? No. Was that the only thing he could do? No, he could have kept him at gunpoint. He didn't have to kill him, but he did. Because you don't push him. You know why? What do you think was going to happen? He pushed me. I'm the enforcer at the Circle A. That's what this whole case is about. That's it in a nutshell. Really, I submit to you, there's no other way to look at it. And it's fortunate, it's very fortunate that this was all captured on video, because there's no other way to look at what Marquise was doing. Now let's go through some clips. I'm hoping this works out like it's supposed to. So we're going to go through some clips that the defendant said. Again, watch the way he says it and what he does. Now what I want to do first is I am going to play some of the video. Okay? Now here's the reason I'm going to play the video for you here. The defendant's statements, again, it's not what he thought, it's what a reasonable person thought in his situation. Again, I say it a lot because it's so important. Okay? When you look at his statement, when you really break it down, okay? Now, the psychologist was saying, in the moment, you can, all these perceptions are different, okay? And, you know, someone might make an argument that he saw it differently because of the moment that was happening, okay? So it stands to reason, and really think about this, before the moment, there should be nothing going on that would distort your perception, right? Okay? If it's the moment, the shooting, that distorts your perception, well, walking around the car, and when you approach, and what happened before the shooting, that shouldn't really be distorted, okay? Now, the first clips that I'm going to play for you show you, and I submit to you, he was untruthful in his interview, okay? The first clips, actually, are his justification for being the parking lot vigilante, why he thinks he can do what he's doing, okay? And I'm hoping that you understand the method to the madness, okay? I'm then going to play the video. When you watch the video, this is what you're going to see. Again, you already saw it. You're going to see the defendant pulled directly into the parking lot. He's going to tell detectives that he was just going to the store, and on his way into the store, he just happened to notice that she didn't have any placards in the front of her car. That's his beginning of this whole event. That's not what happened at all. So his perception would be distorted at the time of the shooting, maybe, arguably. I submit to you it wasn't. The second he was pushed, he committed to killing Marquise. Okay? That's what the evidence is. The second he was pushed, he committed to killing him. We know that because he didn't see his hands. He didn't look at his hands for any threats. In fact, he didn't even really see anything except his feet. You can't kill someone over that. So going back to when it starts, he says he was going to the store and he just happened to see in the front of the car there were no placards. Okay? Watch, where's he pull in? If he was just going to the store, where would he park? In a parking spot. Okay? Now, it's so ironic, though, where he parks. The parking lot vigilante. He parks in the middle of the parking lot. He doesn't even park in one of the open spaces, and he's kind of blocking the rectangle, which is the access to the handicap ramp. That's the incredibly ironic part of the case, okay? That's silly, but that's what happened. He's not going to the store. He went there to confront because he's got a pet peeve. When he pulls in, he's not in a parking spot, and he gets out, and where does he immediately go? Okay? Let's do this. Let's watch and see where he immediately goes. Obviously, you can see in here, there's open spots. If he's really going to the store, I mean, that's really what he wants to do, he would have just pulled in over here. Here comes Marquise and his son. Nothing wrong with that. He pulls up his pants a little bit here because he has loose-fitting pants. Here comes the defendant. Look at all those open spots. He's just coming to the store. Well, wait a second. Why is he not parking in a spot if he's going to the store? Well, I'm sure in the video then we'll see he's going to get out and go towards the front of the store if that's really what he's doing. Let's see what he does. Towards the front of the store. Oh, no, he doesn't go towards the front of the store. He goes directly to the back of her car. Now you're going to hear some clips where he says, hey, you know, she talked to me first. Well, right here, you're going to see he knows someone's in the car because he starts motioning. See? He's motioning. He wouldn't be motioning to an empty car. He knows that there's a female in there by herself and there's 2 kids in there. So is he really going to the store?
Let me ask you a question. You had mentioned that you go to the store all the time, and you had that one incident with the septic company. Any other incidents prior to that? Do you ever have any discussion with the owner of the store?
Yeah, he saw me that day.
No, I mean about these handicaps, somebody parked in the handicap spot.
Yeah, I talked to him the day of the septic.
Okay. Was that Mustafa? Is that his name?
I don't know anything, because there's another guy too.
Oh,
I
okay.
can't keep straight.
What did you tell him?
Same thing, he saw it parked out there, I gave him the phone number, and you can see the company logo on the side of the truck.
Okay.
That was it. There's no reason, he doesn't have any reason to come out and stop people from parking.
Did you ever have a discussion with the owner and stuff, saying, hey, you guys need to enforce this?
Okay, that's his prerogative.
Okay, think about that. Did you ever have a discussion with the owner, hey, you guys need to enforce this? No, that's his prerogative. Okay? So the defendant, because this statement is very contradictory all over the place. Okay? So he's saying that it's up to the owner of the store, not him, to enforce it.
Let me ask you a question. You had mentioned that you go to the store all the time, and you had that one incident with the septic company. Any other incidents prior to that? Do you ever have any discussion with the owner of the store?
Yeah, he saw me that day.
No, I mean about these handicaps, somebody parked in the handicap spot.
Yeah, I talked to him the day of the septic.
Okay. Was that Mustafa? Is that his name?
I don't know anything, because there's another guy too.
Oh,
I
okay.
can't keep straight.
What did you tell
Same thing, he saw it parked out there, I gave him the phone number, and you can see the company logo on the side of the truck.
him? Okay.
That was it. There's no reason, he doesn't have any reason to come out and stop people from parking.
Did you ever have a discussion with the owner and stuff, saying, hey, you guys need to enforce this? Okay.
That's his prerogative.
Well, I know, but I mean, clearly there's an issue with people parking there, wouldn't you say?
Oh, yeah,
Okay,
I'm not always there.
all right.
I'm
So,
trying to get in arguments with people either, you know?
right, absolutely.
When they see me doing stuff like that, they automatically think, hey, what's this guy trying to do, fuck me?
Right.
And,
Wouldn't you think that a little bit? If somebody can take pictures around your car?
well, that's exactly what I'm trying to do.
All right, let's think about that. Let's think about this clip. First of all, look at his demeanor after shooting and killing somebody, all right? Also, and this is like a little side issue, I really don't want to focus too much on it. At different times during his interview, okay, and again, this really is just a very small side issue. It doesn't really mean that much. Watch how his injured arm is fine sometimes. He'll move it around during the interview, okay? Again, it's just really a side issue, okay? But think about these important things that he just said, all right? Hey, it's the owner's prerogative to patrol his own parking spot. Then the detective says, well, I know, but I mean, clearly there's an issue with people parking there, wouldn't you say? And what's he say? Well, I'm not always there. Because he's the parking lot vigilante. Even more important, the defendant says, I'm not trying to get in arguments with people either, you know what I mean? But when they see me doing stuff like that, walking around the car, okay? So in this particular case, walking around the car of a mother with 2 kids in it, they automatically think, hey, what's this guy trying to do? And I apologize for the language, it's his words. Fuck me? Well, yeah. Okay? If a mother's sitting in the car with her 2 kids and he's walking around the car checking everything out, any reasonable person would say, what the heck is going on here? Damn, what is this guy doing? He takes it as an affront. He's like, how could people possibly think? Are you kidding me? So the detective says, wouldn't you think a little bit if somebody came taking pictures around your car? Okay, so let's read the whole thing because this is the important context of it. But this is the defendant. When they see me doing stuff like that, they automatically think, hey, what's this guy trying to do? Fuck me? Well, wouldn't you think that a little bit if somebody came taking pictures around your car? Well, that's exactly what I'm trying to do. So what's he telling you? Okay? And again, pardon my language because it's what the defendant said. He's fucking with him. That's exactly what he's saying here. There's no other way really to take it. Again, listen to it yourself. I'm just playing clips for you. When you feel uncomfortable, people would say, hey, you're fucking with me? Well, that's what I'm trying to do.
Let me ask you a question. You had mentioned that you go to the store all the time, and you had that one incident.
Your Honor,
with the
can we
septic
approach?
company. Any other incidents
Yes,
prior to
you
that?
may.
Do you ever have any discussion with the owner? Let me ask you a question, Mike. At any time and point, because we all know parking in a handicap spot without placards is illegal, correct?
Yeah, but that's not why I ask people. I can't.
Sure, right, and I get that. But at any time and point when you saw the vehicle, you checked the vehicle for handicap placards? Okay. You didn't see no handicap placards? At any time and point when you noticed that, why would you pick up the phone and contact law enforcement?
I heard it was yesterday, but, I can't remember what she said there. Because all we were having was a verbal argument
Okay.
between 2 people.
Right.
I didn't know about a third person. I was literally blind
Sure.
why would you? To the ground.
Right. Well, wouldn't it be best, you think, to call law enforcement and say, hey, there's somebody illegally parked?
It's not gonna help. She did.
Okay. Well, she may
They
not,
always do.
well, she may not know that you called if you walked away, right?
True, very true.
All right, so let's think about this. Think about it logically. What is the defendant's goal? If his true goal was to free up the parking spot, he's now saying, if I call law enforcement, they leave. If his goal is for them to free up the spot, why would he not call law enforcement so that they leave? It's almost hard to explain it because it's so illogical. Well, do you think it's a good idea to call the police when you see people parking in the handicapped spot illegally? No, why would I do that? They'd leave. So now you combine that with his previous statement. Well, I kind of want to F with them. Now you see the picture of what's happening here. I don't want to call law enforcement to make them leave because I want to F. You know, he's thinking to himself, I submit to you, if I give them a really hard time, maybe they truly won't come back again because if I call the police, they're going to leave. So what's really going on? Think about that.
In this particular situation, though, if somebody can park right next to them and walk around to it, does it really matter all that much?
I'm not sure where this is headed. What's
I'm not sure it is curious
Hit from
whether or not
behind.
it's worth arguing over the
Yes, yes, I think it is.
Do you?
Yeah.
I mean, when you, instead of an argument, because
It's
you
not an
just,
argument if you,
Right.
you know,
I just-
I'm agreeing with what he just said. That's
okay, but don't you think, instead of putting yourself in that type of circumstance, that it may escalate, because people are crazy. I mean,
Watch his right hand
there's-
here, too.
You have road rage incidents, you got people getting shot all the time, all kinds of stuff, right? So, hear me out. Wouldn't it be best, instead of putting yourself in those circumstances, to contact law enforcement and have a deputy come out there, or Clearwater Police? Okay. All right, but again, back to the question, wouldn't you think it would be better, instead of putting yourself in that type of circumstance that could escalate?
What does this have to do with
I'm just asking,
me being on my back and?
That does, you told me you were on your back and stuff, but I'm just saying, don't you think that it would be best to notify law enforcement? You said you don't like to argue, you said you don't like to have confrontations. Wouldn't it
Point taken, but,
Okay.
you were straying a bit off course, I think.
No, we'll
Look at his
get back
demeanor.
to that, but I'm just asking you a simple question. Do you think it would be best to call law enforcement and have them address that issue?
You'll never make it.
Okay, because the person what? Will
They
be-
leave.
Okay,
You'll never make it.
all right, so it's,
Unless you guys are literally parked there, you really.
Sometimes we are, sometimes we are close.
Right, but you're not gonna drop an important something for.
Sure.
Okay, why bother you with stupid things like that?
Okay, so he's telling everybody, hey, you know what? It's stupid to call the police about a parking spot. But if I do call, they're going to leave, which is what he wants. It just doesn't make any sense. What's his goal? Why does he want a confrontation so much? And then when he gets the confrontation, and Marquise goes to protect his family, he shoots and kills him after he's retreating. That's the big picture here.
I'll ask a related question though. When you take the pictures, what are your plans with the pictures? Like,
To show the book.
what's the purpose in taking
That's
pictures?
first boss.
Do you take pictures of other people's cars though?
No, actually,
You
that's
see-
just
you see
just
cars.
commercial. I didn't want to take a picture of their car. There's no reason to. I'm not gonna turn them into anybody. I just wanna ask them if they think it's right to be parked where they're parked.
Okay. Do you understand that? I mean, does it ever go through your mind that when you're going up and talking to these people and informing them of them being parked in a handicapped spot, that they might not take that right? That this might go sideways a little bit?
Well, sure, but that's why I take precautions as well.
Like what kind of precautions?
I'm a very careful person and I have a permit.
Okay, do you think you'd go knock on these people's, or I shouldn't say knock on these people's,
Yeah, I
do you
don't
think you'd go confront
confront
them?
anyone
Right,
right in their face.
It's approaching, so we use the term approach instead of confront.
Okay, but it is up to the person who's in the car to actually confront.
If you go up to somebody and approach them, they can take that as being confrontational. You can't really determine how
That
they're
would
gonna
make
take it.
them confrontation.
But if you go up to somebody and you approach them about being parked in a handicapped spot, do you think you'd be willing to do that and take that risk if you didn't take these precautions? Because you don't know how people are gonna react.
I've been carrying a gun most of my adult life, so I can't really answer that in a way that would
Look at his
satisfy
demeanor.
me.
Well, I mean, would you approach these people if you didn't?
Once again, I don't know. I would have to say yeah,
Okay.
but I wouldn't know because, like I said,
You always carry.
I've always carried a firearm.
Okay. Since how long you carried it?
I was 22,
How old are you now?
48, 47, sorry, I'll be 40 in August.
so you exit your vehicle, right? Like you always do, and you get ready to walk in the store.
Yeah.
And what do you see from there?
The placard on the front of the car, because I have to walk by the car to,
So you approach the vehicle?
no, the front of the vehicle, yeah.
Okay. And your intentions on walking around the cars to look for placards?
Totally, yeah.
Okay. Where do
I
you
usually
normally
take pictures if there's,
Okay. You take pictures if you don't see no placards, or you take, okay. Where do you normally look for placards?
license plate, windshield and front. See if there's a front license plate or.
Okay, so let's think about what he says there, okay?
So you start walking around the car?
And I walk from the front to the back, and the back of the
Okay. All right, so what's he say there? So what he says is what I was talking about before. When he gets there, he's just going to the store, was going up to the front, and lo and behold, I noticed that. Well, The video evidence tells you unequivocally that's untrue. So from the get-go, when he starts talking about what happened at the Circle A, not true. From the very beginning of the event, I submit it's not true. Then he says this, and now think about what he said in the previous slide. Okay? He says, I usually take pictures. But in the previous slide, he says he didn't. Okay? Why is he taking pictures, but then not reporting it to law enforcement? Kind of stalky, right? Walks around cars looking for placards, taking pictures, but if he's not going to report it to law enforcement, why is he taking pictures of people's cars? That's really weird.
In the store, and she asked me,
So she rolls her window down?
yes,
Do you make verbal contact with her first, or does
she
she
made
make?
verbal contact with me first.
What was
I
your-
explained what I did. I just asked me what I was doing.
Okay, so she asked you what? What are you doing?
Well,
What are you doing in the car?
yeah, I
And you
said
said-
I'm looking for handicap placards,
Okay.
And then I didn't see, what's that matter
So-
to you?
Okay.
Uh,
So when she rolls her window down, she says, hey, what are you doing? How far are you away from the car?
To the front of the car.
Okay, so you stand at the front?
Yeah, about the front of the car, which is.
Are you on the curb?
sidewalk? Yeah.
Okay, so you're on the sidewalk?
Yeah, I'm not exactly in front of the car, I'm on the sidewalk, at the front.
Okay. So after you start talking to her, do you approach the driver's side of the car?
Yeah, just, of course, I don't want to yell back.
Right. That's understandable. So how far do you approach the vehicle, distance-wise, approximately?
God, it's gonna be, she's in the car. It's
Let's say I'm a driver.
She can probably smell your breath, you know?
Okay, so what's he say in this particular clip? So this, I submit to you, is the second time he's untruthful. The first time is when he says he goes to the store and he just was going to go to the store and just happened upon the car. Well, we know from watching the video, when he got to the parking lot, he went directly to the back of the car, so we know that's not true. Here's the second part where he's not being truthful. He says that Brittany initiated contact with him. We know that's not true because we know he knows she's in the car when he's at the front of the car waving at her like this already. And Brittany testified that she saw his mouth moving but couldn't hear anything. But don't just take Brittany's word for it or the video, because what does Robert Castelli say? When he was looking, the defendant was yelling at the car before the window even came down. So he's not being truthful about who first made contact. He was yelling at Brittany before Brittany said anything. And once he starts yelling and screaming at the car, Brittany's like, what is this about? Leave me alone. And for the next minute and 43 seconds, the defendant's harassing her because he's there to F with people about being in the parking lot. That's what's going on here.
Did he say anything to you?
Negative, not a word.
Did you say anything to him?
No.
Like back up?
No.
Okay, so now we have the defendant talking about what's happening when Marquise comes down the sidewalk. Okay? So Marquise comes down the sidewalk, doesn't say a word. Okay? Doesn't say a single word to him. So the reason that's important, it's not as if Marquise is coming down and saying, I'm going to kick your butt, I'm about to beat you up, get away or I'm going to kill you. Okay? Not a single word. Okay? He didn't hear it. Now Brittany testified that when Marquise was coming down the sidewalk, he said something to the effect of, move away from my woman. I don't remember exactly what the phrase was, but that's what Brittany testified to. And that's when he pushed them to create distance between them.
So he shoves you to the ground, you fall to the ground.
Correct.
Okay.
Slightly, it's not very, slightly.
Okay? Again, he's telling you, hey look, I'm not really hurt, I'm slightly dazed. Certainly not, great bodily harm or imminent death. He was slightly dazed.
If I have to come up off of my hand, I bring the gun out with me. And as I'm coming back this way, I can't support it, so I hit this.
Okay.
And as
What does he do?
as I come out like this, he's taking his step.
Okay. Taking a step?
Taking his steps towards me.
Okay. How close does he get to you before you fire the gun?
Maybe to the front tire.
So show me where. Tell me when to stop.
Stop.
Okay, so right here.
Yeah.
Okay. Was he charging after you?
2 steps running.
Okay? That's not what the evidence is. Okay? And remember, from the get-go in this event, he wasn't truthful. So there's 2 ways to look at it. Was his perception off? Well, his perception wouldn't be off from the get-go. Or is he being untruthful, trying to justify what he did? Let's say, just for argument's sake, that he believed that he was coming and running 2 steps. Would a reasonably cautious person in that situation have misseen that? No, and that's the important part of looking at that instruction. He was retreating. You can't just say, I saw him running towards me, and now it's okay to kill somebody. You look at the evidence, Marquise was retreating. It doesn't matter what he says. From the moment he was pushed, he decided to kill Marquise. That's it. Never saw his hands, only saw his feet, and he makes an assumption. You can't kill people for that. You can't.
Did you see him with a firearm?
No, sir, I didn't see you with anything.
Okay? So he didn't hear anything from Marquise, doesn't see him with a weapon. He says later on in here, never saw his hands. You can't kill people for that.
Let me ask you a question. You mentioned earlier that you asked Mustafa about video and stuff like that.
Correct.
Do you think the video would show him charging or
It
running?
should.
Okay.
There should be an angle right on that parking spot.
Okay. What happens if I told you that I looked at the video and in no time and point does he come running up towards you? He actually takes a step back.
I would disagree.
Okay. I'm just asking. Okay.
I would disagree in a heartbeat.
Okay? Just because he disagrees doesn't mean it was a lawful shoot. Okay? I don't want anyone confused about that. Just because he sees it differently doesn't mean he was justified in killing him. Okay? The final point. The final point.
What happens if he didn't come towards you? Would you still fire around?
There's no reason to. If he's retreating, then I don't need to use my firearm.
What if he's just standing still?
I still don't need to use my firearm.
Here comes the push. His hat and glasses don't even come off. Firearm's not out yet, everyone's moving backwards. The defendant himself tells you it's manslaughter. The defendant himself tells you it's manslaughter. You know what Marquise McLaughlin's guilty of? He's guilty of loving and trying to protect his family. he died because of it. The defendant is guilty of manslaughter. Thank you.
All right, members of the jury, this is a good time for our lunch break. We'll take an hour. As I said before, do not discuss the facts of the case, even among yourselves, until you go back and deliberate, and please don't make up your mind one way or the other till you've heard everything, all right? So we'll see you in an hour. All right, so the defense will have an hour and 40 minutes. If you want an hour and 45 minutes, it's fine. And then Mr. Schaub will have 45 minutes left, okay? Thank you, Your Honor. All right, thank you. All right, so we'll see everybody in an hour.